Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new Customer Show series of videos, which is Myth Busting with Ian Golding. So thanks for watching this video. Just to introduce myself to begin with, my name's Darren Wake, and I'm Head of Customer Success at CustomerSure. And I'd love to welcome Ian Golding. So Ian, I'm sure many of you know who Ian is. Ian's an extremely well-known CX consultant who helps companies the world over to improve customer experience, and he's extremely passionate about doing the right thing for customers and making big changes out there. And we're really delighted at Customer Show that Ian's agreed to do these series of short videos with us. Just to let you know, the format, we have a number of kind of questions or myths that we're going to put out to Ian and just talk about. But Ian is totally unaware of exactly what we're going to ask him and talk about in these. So I'm very interested to hear his thoughts on the spot, as it were. So Ian, would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I probably don't need to say much more, but it's always a pleasure to chat with you. And it's an easy decision for me to have this conversation with you because I've admired you personally, Darren, and the work that you do with CustomerSure, because we have very many shared philosophies on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And, doing the right thing, again, it might sound a little bit evangelical, but actually, genuinely, that's what we want to do. That's what I do. That's what you do. And I think it's so important that we're able to share knowledge in this way with people that aren't being sold to, that they're just able to gather information that helps them to understand certain things. So, as you say, I've got no idea what you're going to ask me. I can sort of try and guess, but I won't tell you what my guesses are. We'll see what that is afterwards.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect, Ian. Well, exciting to see how it all goes. Great. So the first thing I want to talk about and kind of pose it is it a myth or is it something that people should really think about and take seriously? Is one where if I'm a CX lead in my organization, to effectively measure customer experience and really get a good handle on it, NPS should be my lead metric and should be my lead KPI for measuring satisfaction of my customers.
Hang on, I haven't got a bell, but ding, 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 ding. That's why I guessed that you would be asking me about NPS. Without question, it is the big question. It is the big question that most people ask themselves. And my immediate response to that is that the world has convinced itself. And when I say the world, I mean not just customer experience professionals, but the world of business, the world of all organizations, because actually it's not just commercial businesses that measure NPS. Public sector uses NPS as well as the commercial sector.
Yes.
It's almost like the world has convinced itself that it has to measure NPS. It's like there's some kind of weird law that was written that says you must measure NPS. But actually, that's rubbish. There is no law that says you have to measure anything. And is it a myth that NPS should be the lead metric? 100%. NPS is, as many know, a mechanism that is probably the most divisive of any measurement system that has ever been created in the customer experience, customer service space. And when I say customer experience and customer service, as you and I know, customer experience in relative terms is a pretty new discipline. In fact, NPS probably was created, but in fact it was. NPS was created in 2003 before customer experience was even recognized as a discipline.
That's right.
It didn't happen until 2011. So originally it was customer service professionals that were looking at NPS as the metric. But does it need to be the lead? No. Is it the best metric? No. Is it always the right thing to measure? No. But the problem is we live in a world where most leaders of organizations, whether they be public or private sector, are incredibly wedded to scores. Leaders are obsessed with scores, and they are so obsessed with scores that to a degree, I feel that many have lost sight of why they need the score in the first place. And NPS, unfortunately, has become the primary example of it. I need an NPS score. Why? And interesting, no one ever asks that question. Well, why do I need an NPS score? What am I going to do with the score? Why is it of any importance? What difference does it make? One of the and I'll stop rambling in a moment, Darren, but one of the greatest weaknesses that I've observed in the way organizations are determining how to measure the customer experience in the first place is that incredibly few, you probably know this even more than me, have a VoC strategy. In other words, very few have actually even documented what is their voice of the customer strategy. What do they want to measure? How do they want to measure it? Who are they going to speak to? How are they going to? It's not been created. And unfortunately, many decision makers who want the score don't really understand the mechanics behind it. They don't really, it's become almost popularized. And part of that is driven through benchmarking. I need to benchmark my score against someone else. Part of it is driven through software providers, technology providers who provide these things. But a long-winded way of very passionately saying, no. The NPS is a myth that you have to have it as the leading metric. I am not saying it is irrelevant, but unfortunately, and many people have heard me say this, the overwhelming majority of organizations using NPS today are measuring it incorrectly. And as a result, it is completely worthless. And if you're watching this thinking, but hang on a second, I'm spending a huge amount of money getting this, well, you need to question what you're spending money on. Because quite frankly, if you don't know what comes from it as a result, then you need to question whether you should be doing it at all.
No, I totally agree with that, Ian. It's amazing how many times we engage with an organization for the first time where there's a real appetite and hunger from the organization, often not from the CX team, but often the senior leadership team that have heard about NPS and say, we need an NPS score, we want an NPS score, often for benchmarking it or just to see how we're doing. And it astounds me sometimes how detached it is from the most important person in all of this, which is the customer, really. And it feels kind of light years away from it. And
but that's almost the point, Darren, because the score is not about the customer. That the score is for us.
Exactly.
And that's the wrong way around.
Exactly. It's purely from the organization's point of view. How would you be to recommend us to build, so we can sell more products and services? So it's very much not about the service delivered or the consistency of the outcomes the customer gets, but very much about what's in it for me. And it's the wrong way of kind of looking at it. And and I think there's each organization we deal with is a different level of maturity on it, and some need educating and bringing along that journey and your point about a VoC strategy being absent is all too often apparent in companies where it's driven by NPS. And when you are driven by NPS, you'll see this where it's open for so much gaming of it, in terms of how it's asked, when it's asked, whether you lead respondents, whether you lead with color coding or imagery. And then it becomes utterly meaningless. And then there's companies we've worked with in the past and engaged with where they're patting themselves on the back with a high NPS score, but then other measures in the business which are more important are like going the other way. And then it's like, hang on a sec, what's going on?
Do you know the two things to add to what I've said? Because I need to I always feel I need to defend Fred Reichheld, who created NPS, because his intention was not the way organizations are using it. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Fred Reichheld doesn't call it Net Promoter Score because actually he's really quite, in a way, angry and upset that it's ended up being this obsession with the score. He calls it net promoter system.
Yes.
Because the point is not the score, it's what the score's telling you. But unfortunately, that's got totally lost. And you know, so people changing this is the problem. You know, because trying to wean leaders off something they've become very attached to, it's not that simple.
No.
And you've got to be very careful in the way that you have these kind of conversations. But the question you need to be asking yourself and asking leaders is the NPS score representative of the truth? Okay? Because our role as CX professionals is to understand the reality, is to understand the truth. It is not to produce a score to massage my ego. You know, that is the fundamental difference. So is it telling us the truth? Because if it isn't, then there's no point measuring it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And therefore, you're just leading yourself down a blind alley and you're not going to get the insights, because if you step back, what is it we're doing a VoC program for? Well, it's to understand really what customers think and feel about us at these key points across various journeys, and where we need to focus our efforts and investment to make improvements. And therefore, basing it all entirely on one question, I absolutely agree with it. It's not what Frank Reichel set out to do, but by companies following that, it's a very dangerous precedent. Yeah. So it definitely kind of sounds like a kind of strong myth, actually. And I agree. I think when we both work with organizations and help them, it's a journey, because coming in and saying, actually, what you're doing is wrong, tear it up and throw it in a bin, when then often bonuses may be attached to it, or a whole manner of different things, is a very sensitive one. So it's a bit of a kind of a nudge theory to get people out of it, I think. So, but
my tip to anyone that's thinking this resonates is don't try and fight the score, okay, for the reasons that you're saying. But if you really want to ensure that your NPS mechanism can become more effective, whilst you're reporting the score, also report the percentage of detractors. Because if you can focus everyone's minds on not the score, but reducing the proportion of detractors, that's much more tangible. Because any customer that's prepared to say, no, I would not recommend you, that's a problem. And that is something that feels far more realistic and far easier for people to get their heads around than an artificially high NPS score.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, because an NPS score can be made up in various different ways because of the mechanics involved in calculating an NPS score. And I agree with that. One thing we often look at is I say, focus on the bottom box. So focus on the detractors and the low scores, because you learn more from them than any other bunch of people. And they're the ones that, if you're doing the right things why are they a 6 or a 5 or a 4? Well, you know, if you approach VoC in the right way, you'll elicit that information to work on. Great. Excellent. No, so very much kind of sounds like a firm kind of a myth to make that solitary NPS and make it the be all and end all. I'd just like to say thank you everyone for watching these, and please give us your comments or your views. If you disagree with Ian, if you disagree with me, we'd love to hear what people have got to think. If you've got ideas that you've seen work well when we're looking at NPS or VoC surveys or alternative ways to get feedback, and indeed talking about the use of bonuses as well. We'd love to know what you guys are working on, and any views, even if you totally think Ian and Darren are talking nonsense.
Myths, you know, if there are any other myths that you think need to be busted, you know, tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot out there. So this is kind of the first one that we'll cover a lot more. So just like to say thank you very much, Ian, and please give us your feedback. And as Ian says, any other myths you'd like to use, please supply them in the comments, and we'll cover them next time. Thank you.
Thank you.